The wind was sharp that night, sharper than the words that had led to her punishment. Nia stood silently as her stepmother and father, with cold authority, ordered the servants to drag her bed out to the yard. The wooden frame creaked as it was hoisted off the ground, swaying ever so slightly like a gallows. Her stepmother's face was tight with victory, her eyes gleaming with something darker than discipline. "She must learn," she said with a voice as brittle as dried leaves. Her father said nothing, just turned and walked back inside. His silence was its own betrayal. The villagers gathered like moths drawn to cruel light. They stood in silence, huddled under their cloaks, some murmuring that it was not right, but no one moved to stop it. A few even nodded as if the humiliation was deserved. Nia had always been a quiet child, but her presence carried something unspoken, something that unsettled those who preferred things simple. Her kindness was mistaken for arrogance, her beauty for vanity, her questions for defiance. So when the stepmother whispered tales of her insolence and stubbornness, it wasn't hard to believe. People are quick to believe wrong about those they envy. Nia climbed onto the bed with bare feet. The wooden planks beneath her were cold, the linen sheets stiff from the wind. She lay on her side, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her. Above her, the stars blinked in their eternal watchfulness. They shimmered not with warmth, but with the kind of pity that couldn't intervene. The moon, pale and distant, threw her light across Nia's shivering frame as if to say, "I see you." The frost began to settle on her skin slowly, like the touch of unwelcome fingers. Her breaths came in soft puffs of fog, and she willed herself not to cry. Crying, she had learned, made them feel they'd won. But even without tears, her thoughts twisted into ache. She wondered what she had done to deserve a father who looked through her as if she were a wall, a man who once carried her on his shoulders but now could not carry the weight of defending her. Time dragged like chains across the ground. Every hour stretched. Every gust of wind felt like a punishment sent from the mouths of those who never spoke up. And still the village houses stood silent, windows shut, doors locked, hearts colder than the air. But something shifted. Just past midnight, when even the stars seemed tired, a breeze began to stir, not the kind that bites but one that moved like memory. It brushed her cheeks softly, then tucked itself under her shawl, coiling around her like a blanket. Nia opened her eyes, expecting more cold, but found herself warmed by something unexplainable. The wind no longer whistled harshly but hummed gently, like a lullaby she couldn't remember the words to. Leaves rustled as if whispering stories from the earth. The wooden frame creaked again, but now it sounded like a cradle, not a prison. And the frost, it stopped biting. It melted ever so slightly, and steam rose from her breath in longer, steadier plumes. Her limbs, numb before, began to feel alive. Not warm but wrapped. The wind had become her blanket. And in that strange hush, the girl who had been sent out to freeze began to feel something else. Power. It wasn't loud or bright, it was silent, patient, like her. It came not from fire but from the endurance of ice that does not crack. She was not broken. She was not ashamed. Her body ached, but her spirit didn't bend. Her silence was no longer submission, it was defiance wrapped in stillness. Inside the house, the stepmother tossed and turned. The father sat awake at the hearth, guilt rising in him like smoke. But still they did not go out. Still they left her there, thinking the punishment would teach her obedience. What they didn't know was that the cold was shaping something inside her, something they could not thaw or break. By dawn, Nia was still on the bed, her skin pale but eyes open. The villagers peeked out from their windows and were shocked to find her not frozen, but calm. The wind still lingered around her like a friend refusing to leave. One child said they saw her hair moving as if hands were brushing it. Another swore they heard humming. No one could explain it, but all felt the shift. The punishment meant to break her had only unveiled her strength. And in the air, something ancient stirred, a whisper not of pity but of protection. The wind, once an enemy, had chosen her. The sun rose pale and uncertain, spilling its cold light over the village. A hush settled over the huts as people stepped outside. They expected to find a frozen girl, stiff with the weight of the cruel night. But what they saw made many stop mid-step. Nia was still lying on the wooden frame, her arms folded under her head, her legs tucked into herself, like a child in a warm bed. Her lips, rather than blue or cracked, looked soft, touched by pink. Her breath moved steadily, as if she had not just spent the night under the open sky but in the comfort of a thick blanket beside a glowing hearth. The frost had touched everything else. Roofs sparkled with ice, the grass was stiff, and the trees bore crystal leaves that clicked in the morning breeze. But the space around Nia's body remained untouched. Not even a whisper of white dared settle on her. An old woman, hunched and silent, made her way closer. Nana Leko, who was said to have once been kissed by lightning and had since spoken to birds and trees, stared hard at the girl on the bed. She sniffed the air once and nodded slowly. "The wind chose her," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for a few to hear. "Not all who breathe it understand it. But sometimes the wind decides." The villagers gathered in cautious groups. Some peeked from behind fences, others sent children to creep closer. They watched for signs of deception, perhaps some hidden trick. Maybe her stepmother had felt guilt and returned to wrap the girl during the night. But no blanket, no furs, no ember stones were in sight. Nia wore only the same thin dress she had been cast out in. Her hair, dark and long, should have been stiff with frost, yet it flowed lazily across her cheek, untouched by cold. Children, always the boldest, moved closer. One boy whispered, "Is she dead?" Another replied, "Dead people don't breathe like that." They dared to reach out their hands, holding them just above her skin. Their eyes widened, the air around her was warm. Not just warmer than the rest of the morning, but warm like breath against your palm, warm like someone holding you close. The stepmother appeared then, dragging a bucket as though nothing strange had occurred. She saw the villagers gathered and narrowed her eyes. "What now? Has the brat melted your brains too?" she spat. Someone asked why the frost had left the girl untouched. She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Trick of the night," she snapped. "You people believe anything." Probably wet herself in her sleep and it steamed her warm. She swung the bucket and poured its water at the wooden frame. It splashed everywhere, except where Nia slept. The liquid curved mid-air, pulled by an invisible hand, and landed only on the ground. The villagers gasped. The stepmother stared. Later that day the whispers began. They started small, between mothers grinding millet, between boys tending goats. The phrase, "the wind chose her," spread like fire in dry grass. That evening, when the sun bled out and the sky turned to bruise, Nia was still lying there. But now her face bore a soft smile. As the wind picked up, people watched from their doorways. It began as a breeze, gentle and unhurried. Then it grew, circling Nia like a thread being pulled through the air. Swirls danced around her limbs. The trees barely moved, but the wind around Nia gathered thick and deliberate, like invisible hands tucking a child in for sleep. Her hair lifted slightly, then settled again. The hem of her dress fluttered, then stilled. Some said the wind was humming, a tune without words, a lullaby from a mother no one saw. One of the children, a boy named Tabo, known for mischief and wild courage, picked up a small stone. Whether to test the magic or break it, no one knew. He tossed it at Nia with a smirk. The stone never landed. It froze mid-air, paused like it had forgotten what it was doing, and then, with a sharp hiss, flew back and struck the boy on the chest. He yelped and tumbled backward. A hush fell. Then someone whispered, "Did you see it curve?" The villagers looked at one another, uneasy now. Nia's body never stirred. She was asleep, or at least appeared so. But it was no ordinary sleep. It was a sleep of deep trust, of perfect peace. The kind of rest no one in the village had known in years. There was no fear in her brow, no tension in her jaw. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the wind. By the third day even the birds had noticed. 2 small finches landed near her frame and didn't fly away. They hopped close and tucked themselves beside her leg. The wind lifted gently to cover them too. Children began leaving little gifts, a smooth rock, a piece of bread, a string of beads, at the base of her bed. None dared touch her, but all began to respect her. Not for what she had done, but for what had chosen her. The stepmother no longer spoke. The father stayed inside. The villagers no longer looked her way with pity, but with awe. Something had happened, not with lightning or fire but with air. Something silent and ancient had wrapped itself around the girl they had once left to freeze. And now she was more than a girl. She was a mystery. A whisper. A wonder. The second night descended with a colder breath than the one before. The stars, once flickering with gentle pity, now seemed sharpened, like spears glittering high above. The wind blew sharper down from the hills, and even the goats huddled tighter in their pens. But inside the house of Nia's father, the fire crackled warm and arrogant. The stepmother stirred her soup with an annoyed glare as she heard Nia's soft footsteps return from the edge of the village where she had been gathering kindling. A punishment, another one. "She dares to look healthy," the stepmother snapped, her lip curling. Nia stood by the door, holding her bundle of wood, her arms shaking. Her hands were red with cold, but her face, somehow, glowed. "I'll sleep inside tonight," Nia said, her voice quiet but steady. The stepmother turned slowly. Her father didn't look up. He had become a shadow of himself, obedient not to the spirits or the ancestors, but to the bitterness of the woman he had chosen over his own daughter. "No," the stepmother said. "You didn't learn your lesson. Out again." She said it like a curse. Nia turned her face toward her father. For a moment, his lips parted as if he might speak. But then he looked at the soup and Nia knew. So once again they tied her bed high on the wooden rack outside the compound walls, exposed to the wind and sky. No roof. No walls. Just ropes and wood and shame. Villagers peeked from their windows. Some whispered, "It isn't right." But no one moved. The wind was already waiting when she arrived. It came not with a roar but a rustle, soft, attentive, like an old friend preparing a place to sit. Nia climbed onto the hanging bed and curled beneath her tattered blanket. Her body remembered the cold from last night and braced itself. But the wind remembered her too. It rose with purpose this time, not tentative or searching. It coiled beneath her bed like fingers rocking her gently. It lifted her braids from her shoulders and pressed warmth into her cheeks. The bitter cold in the air dared to creep close, but the wind stood between them. Somewhere a shutter slammed open. A villager gasped. Another claimed their hearth suddenly blazed without wood. The air, though chill, had shifted. In one house, a baby who had been crying for hours suddenly fell asleep. In another, a mother murmured, "It smells like wildflowers," even as snow gathered on her windowsill. And above it all, Nia breathed out and whispered again, "I am not alone." The wind replied, not in words but in a sound that was almost music. It wrapped itself around her tightly, like a second blanket. It tugged her blanket back up when it slipped. It sighed near her ear, brushing her with heat that rose not from fire, but from belonging. Then came the howl. It began low, a groan that rose from the stones beneath the village, through the trees and across the rooftops. It raced down chimneys and danced between rafters. Doors trembled. Windows clattered. The bed creaked and swung like a cradle. But Nia did not flinch. In fact, she smiled. The howl of the wind pushed into every home. It reached her stepmother, who jumped from her chair. "What is this noise?" she cried, rushing to the door, only to find the soup boiling over without flame, the pot rattling on its own. Her face went pale. In the father's heart something shifted. Just a flicker, like a memory brushing the surface of his soul. The voice of his mother, "You must protect what is yours," and then the memory faded again. By now, villagers were lighting candles and stepping outside. One by one they looked toward the bed, swinging high on its wooden frame. And there she was, Nia, asleep, peaceful, smiling. Not a trace of frost on her. Not even her lips. A woman gasped. "She's blessed," she whispered. A man said, "The wind favors her." Children stared in awe, their tiny fingers gripping the hems of their mother's wraps. And in that moment the village shifted too. Not with noise but with noticing. The stepmother, watching from the doorway, knew something had escaped her grasp. Not just control, something older. Something sacred. She should be frozen, she hissed. But the hiss came with fear now. Inside the house the fire had died. But outside, Nia slept, warm as summer. The wind stayed with her all night, not just protecting her but honoring her. And the villagers? They could not sleep. Because now even the silence whispered, something is wrong. And something is right. By the third night, whispers had become louder than the wind itself. Villagers no longer slept soundly. Doors creaked with invisible pressure, and chimneys coughed with gusts that carried warmth instead of chill, all seeming to come from the direction of the girl left outside. The father, now deeply disturbed by his daughter's continued survival, sat with furrowed brows beside his wife, who refused to look him in the eyes. She had suggested the punishment, but even she hadn't expected this. "This is not natural," the father muttered. "No one sleeps through this cold. Not without fire. Not without something else." "She's cursed," the stepmother spat, but it sounded less like conviction and more like fear. The man stood abruptly, knocking over a bowl of stale porridge. "If she is cursed, we must have it removed. I will call the priest. Let's see if wind dares to defy holy prayer." By twilight, the village priest arrived. A solemn, gray-bearded man who'd once blessed the chief's newborns and buried many elders. He had seen strange things in his time, but this, a girl untouched by frost? It unsettled him. "I will need silence," the priest said as he approached the wooden frame where Nia was again laid, wrapped in only thin cloth. The air around her shimmered strangely, not with heat, but with a calm that didn't belong to the season. Her eyes were closed, her breath slow and untroubled. He stood over her and began to chant, calling upon ancient blessings and sacred names. His voice rose against the rising wind, steady at first, but the gusts began to resist. Leaves swirled, dust kicked into his eyes, and the trees began to moan like low drums warning a coming storm. He shouted louder, desperate now, his robe flapping violently behind him. "You who protect her, reveal yourself," he cried. And the wind answered. It did not howl, it screamed. With a sudden gust, it struck the priest like a hand from the heavens, knocking him backward and onto the ground. His hat flew, his staff splintered, and his chants died in his throat. The villagers who had gathered to witness scrambled into their homes, slamming shutters and barring doors. Even the bravest among them refused to come closer. From the forest, trees leaned, creaking and groaning as if pushed by invisible arms. Branches bent toward Nia, not threatening but reverent. One tree dropped a soft leaf upon her blanket. Another let fall a bloom that had no business blooming in such cold. The priest, now on his knees, whispered, "This is no curse. This is something else." The father ran forward and grabbed him by the collar. "You said you'd break it. You said." "I said I'd try," the priest snapped. "But you brought this on yourselves. Whatever protects this girl is not darkness. It is older than my prayers. Older than your hatred. You've cast out someone favored by the wind itself." The father looked toward his daughter, who still slept peacefully, unaware of the chaos her presence caused. He wanted to shout, to demand she explain herself, but deep in his gut, something told him this wasn't about her explaining anything. This was about him answering for what he'd done. The priest staggered to his feet and turned to leave. "I won't come again," he said. "You may answer to the wind yourselves." Back inside, the stepmother locked every window and covered all mirrors. "She's a witch," she whispered over and over. "She's a witch. She's cursed. She's not normal." But in her heart, the words rang hollow. That night, Nia stirred for the first time. Her eyes fluttered open as the wind brushed her cheek like a parent checking for fever. She looked up at the sky, now lit with stars so bright it seemed they were closer than usual, watching, glowing, waiting. And she whispered, "I hear you." The wind rustled in response, almost shy. From inside their homes, the villagers pressed ears to their walls. A soft singing floated on the breeze, a lullaby none could place, sung in a language no one remembered learning. Mothers felt their babies quiet. Old men stopped coughing. Windows fogged with warmth, not chill. Candles flickered with a steady rhythm, a breath, a heartbeat, a reminder that something unseen was guarding them all. The father, tossing in his sleep, dreamt of a hand made of wind holding a mirror to his face, and in the reflection he saw not Nia's suffering, but his own cruelty laid bare. Nia closed her eyes again, and this time as she slept, a swirl of air formed a dome above her, a cocoon woven of wind and starlight and ancient breath. Within it she was untouchable. Not even frost dared creep toward her skin. The third test had not broken her. It had broken something else instead. Something cold, something silent, something shameful. And the wind continued to watch, waiting for the world to change. The sky had turned a softer shade of dusk that evening, a dusty violet streaked with threads of amber, as if the heavens themselves were beginning to weep for Nia. The villagers barely glanced her way now. Her presence had become both a mystery and a mirror, a reflection of everything they dared not speak. The stepmother's command had become ritual, "Hang her bed again." And so they did, mechanically, with tight lips and silent hearts, lifting the frail wooden frame and fixing it outside, facing the wind, the stars, and the unforgiving open night. But something had changed in Nia. The cold no longer made her flinch. Her limbs, though lean and tired, no longer shivered. Her eyes, once dull from fear, now carried a gleam, not of defiance but of knowing. She felt the rhythm of the air around her as if it was a song only she could hear. That night, as she lay back once again on the suspended bed, a breeze curled around her toes, gentle and slow, as though it was waiting for her to settle, like a mother waiting for her child to close her eyes. Then came the set. It arrived so quietly, not on the first gust nor the second, but like a memory rising from the cracks of the soul, a tender whisper that bypassed the nose and wrapped itself around the heart. Jasmine. Sweet, wild jasmine. And beneath it, the unmistakable earthy aroma of roasted groundnuts. Nia's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. That scent, it was her mother. She had almost forgotten. Almost. It had been years since her mother passed, buried with hurried tears and distant chants. The stepmother's voice had quickly erased the memory from the house. Too soft, she'd say. Too full of dreams. But in that moment on the swaying bed, beneath the stars, Nia remembered everything. She closed her eyes and the world shifted. She was no longer cold, no longer bound to wood and punishment. In the dream, she stood barefoot in a small field where the wind played with her hair like a child's fingers. And there, standing in front of her, as clear as the moon above, was her mother. Her smile was warm, not the forced warmth of adults trying to be kind, but the deep, unshakable kind that said, "You are safe now." "You remember me," her mother whispered, her voice carried on the breeze, though her lips never moved. Nia couldn't speak. She nodded, tears already brimming. "The wind remembers too," her mother continued, stepping closer. "It has followed you since the day you were born. You don't belong to the cold. You belong to the breath between trees, to the hush of the storm before it breaks. You are of the wind, Nia." "But why now?" Nia finally found her voice, trembling. "Why not before?" "Because you were not ready to remember," her mother said. "Sometimes pain hides the truth. But now your silence has made the world listen." The ground beneath them shimmered, or was it her mother's dress? It sparkled like woven clouds. And behind her, Nia could see outlines of shapes, women with firm shoulders, girls with wide eyes, grandmothers with arms like branches. All of them watching. All of them part of her. When Nia awoke, her cheeks were wet. She touched her face and tasted the salt. They were real tears, not from sadness but from something deeper, a grief that had finally found the words to speak. She sat up slowly, letting the air greet her like an old friend. Then she noticed the scent again. But this time it wasn't just in the air. Beneath her bed, nestled where no hand had placed it, was a small pile of fresh jasmine flowers. White, delicate, untouched by frost. No one in the village grew jasmine. Not anymore. And the groundnut shells nearby were still warm as though just roasted. Nia stared at them for a long time, then lifted one of the jasmine petals to her nose. It still carried the warmth of a hand that no longer lived, the memory of a song once hummed while combing her hair, the echo of a kiss pressed to her forehead before sleep. Below the platform, a gust of wind rushed through the trees, rustling their leaves as if applauding. The stars seemed brighter that night, crowding close together like curious eyes peering down to watch. The stepmother, watching from behind her window, said nothing. But her eyes had begun to flicker, uncertain, darting like moths caught in a jar. Nia curled back under the sky, the jasmine clutched in her hand, and for the first time in years she felt full. Not just of food or warmth, but of presence, of being seen, not as a burden, not as a girl to be silenced, but as something ancient and carried by the wind. And when she closed her eyes once more, she felt it again, the hush of breath across her brow, the hand that brushed her hair back gently, and her mother's voice saying, "You are never alone." The first to speak was old Mama Kilo, the village's memory keeper, her back hunched like a bow, her voice brittle but never ignored. One morning after sweeping the dust outside her hut, she looked toward the family compound where Nia had been hung out again and muttered to no one in particular, "The wind remembers what we forget." Her words fluttered like loose leaves, caught by curious ears and carried by gossiping mouths. It didn't take long for whispers to fill the air. "She didn't shiver last night," someone said over the grinding stone. "I saw frost on the chicken coop but not a single flake near that girl," said another. The villagers were used to cold. Nights in the dry season bit like jealous spirits, sneaking through cracks in the mud walls, turning breath to smoke. But something about the air near Nia's hanging bed had changed. It wasn't just that she survived it. It was the warmth, impossible and undeniable. It reached beyond her. A woman, eyes sunken from years of loss, confessed that when she passed by Nia's corner after sunset, she felt something like her long-dead mother's arms around her. "I wept right there," she said. "It was the same warmth I felt as a baby." Children, ever braver than adults, began creeping out of their homes in twos and threes. They tiptoed through the sleeping dust, holding hands and giggling nervously. They didn't dare go too close. Nia's father had a reputation for swinging first and questioning later, but they crouched just near enough. They sat cross-legged near the acacia fence, huddled like chicks. They whispered stories into the night, of sky spirits, of wind dancers, of the goddess who wept rain. And as they sat, something did come, not a gust, not a howl, but a breath. A soft, circling warmth that tousled their hair and kissed their cheeks. One boy swore he heard a lullaby humming in the air. A girl clutched her chest and said, "It feels like love." No one laughed at her. By morning Nia had not stirred. She slept with a calmness that made mothers ache. Even her stepmother, spying through the curtain, felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of envy, fear and something she couldn't name. The market square buzzed with talk. A young hunter claimed he saw the wind bend away from a burning log and spiral toward Nia's bed instead. Fire won't fight the wind when it loves, he said. Others weren't sure what to believe. Witchcraft, muttered the butcher, sharpening his cleaver. Or trickery. Maybe she has charms tied under that bed. But most weren't so certain anymore. There was no spell that made jasmine bloom in the dry season. No charm that made even bitter men speak softer around a child. No curse that turned fear into comfort. A widow with cracked heels and trembling hands knelt near Nia's bed just after dusk. She whispered, "My son died 2 winters ago. He loved the wind," said it sang to him. "If you see him, tell him I still wear his beads." And then she left, a little straighter in the back. The cloth sellers began leaving scraps of soft fabric near Nia's sleeping spot. Small things, pieces too tiny to sell but too beautiful to throw away. A green thread here, a golden lace there. When the wind lifted them, it looked like they danced. The village drummaker came to watch. He didn't speak, didn't gossip. He simply stood with his calloused hands folded, listening. Later he carved a new drum, smaller than usual but with wind symbols etched deep into its frame. He called it Nia's song. When he played it, the wind came. Nia remained quiet. She didn't speak much during the day, still bruised from silence and years of being unseen. But she began to smile when the wind touched her cheek. And when the village girls, the same ones who used to tease her, offered to braid her hair with soft beads and sky-colored threads, she nodded. Change had begun, slow and unsure, like the first bloom after a long drought. The stepmother noticed it too. Her neighbors no longer met her eyes with the same respect. Some even turned away. She tried to blame Nia for it, that cursed girl, making a spectacle. But the words fell hollow. Even her own brother refused to eat at her table. The father grew quieter. He watched from a distance as the villagers began laying small gifts near the corner post where Nia's bed was hung, groundnuts, feather charms, pieces of carved wood. He rubbed his temples often. The village he ruled with fear was softening in places, and all because the wind chose his daughter. Nia began humming, softly at first, like testing her voice again after years of silence. Her lullaby matched the sighing breeze, and sometimes the trees seemed to lean closer to listen. The whispers continued, but they changed in tone. From gossip to reverence. From suspicion to belief. "She is not alone," someone said. "She never was," answered another. And somewhere above, the wind turned its face toward the village, not in rage, not in vengeance, but in quiet protection. It had found its child again. The air is thick with the scent of river mint and something older, something like memory. As Nia lies still on the bed by the river's edge, her eyes flutter closed and the world around her shifts. The wind begins to sing again, not howling or whistling but truly singing. The melodies rise and fall in a rhythm that seems to come from the land itself. The notes are like breath in a cradle, like a grandmother's hum, soft but heavy with meaning. No human tongue could shape those words, yet Nia understands them deep in her bones. They speak of birth, of firelit gatherings, of girls who once danced with bare feet on warm earth. It's as if the wind remembers every woman who ever loved, fought, and mourned on this land, and now it sings through her. Above her, the mist twirls and dips like a dancer spinning to the rhythm. It hovers over her face, never touching but close enough to kiss. It weaves around the bedposts, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Across the river, a fisherman rows by and pauses, gripping the sides of his canoe. His mouth opens then closes again. The girl, he swears later, was not lying down, she was floating. Suspended above her bed, just inches in the air, hair lifted by an invisible hand, her face calm, lit by something unseen. Nearby, a tall baobab tree groans, and its branches creak and bend slowly, unnaturally toward her. The largest branch lowers itself like an arm, curving to create a shelter over the girl, as though shielding her from the night sky. In the morning, villagers find her still resting beneath that curved limb, untouched by dew, her skin warm as sunlight. They do not ask questions anymore. They only nod. They speak softer now around her, as though their words might be carried away and heard by the wind itself. The wind that sings. The wind that remembers. The wind that chose her. The morning was unusually still, as if the air itself was holding its breath. But the stillness didn't last. By midday, a procession of elders moved through the village with heavy steps and solemn faces. At the center of them stood the chief, tall, robed in dark red, with eyes sharp as a spear tip. His voice carried even before he reached the courtyard of Nia's home. "Where is the woman who dares mistreat the wind's chosen?" The villagers had whispered about Nia for weeks now, how the river wouldn't freeze near her, how animals gathered near her bed as if summoned, how the tree bent like a guardian. But none dared confront the stepmother, not openly, until the chief arrived. His presence was like a blade cutting through fog. There could be no more hiding. The stepmother stepped forward, her face a mask of innocence. She bowed deeply, voice trembling just enough to seem humble. "My lord, there has been a misunderstanding," she said. "The girl, she wanders in the night, she sleeps by the river against my warnings. I worry for her. She is not well." But before the chief could respond, the sky dimmed, though no cloud passed overhead. The air grew tense, pressing down on every chest. A sound rose slowly, like distant thunder rolling across stone. The chief turned his head sharply. The villagers took a step back. Then the wind came. It didn't rush in like a gust. It arrived with purpose, curling around the chief's feet, coiling like a serpent around the stepmother's legs. It snapped the beads from her ankles, tangled her hair, and twisted her robes around her like a net. Her eyes widened in fear, but the wind did not stop there. From inside her home, the curtains began to flap violently, though no doors were open. Blankets lifted from her bed as if pulled by invisible hands. One by one they flew through the air like startled birds. The crowd gasped as the wind carried them across the village, all the way to the riverbank, where Nia still lay resting beneath the curved tree limb. The blankets floated down and tucked themselves around her gently, like a mother swaddling a newborn. Mouths hung open. The wind had made its choice. Not only was Nia untouched, she was being protected, wrapped, warmed, honored. The chief turned back to the stepmother. "You speak lies," he said, voice cold. "But the wind does not lie. The earth does not lie." He stepped closer. "Tell me now, before it decides to punish you further, what did you do?" But the woman was shaking. Her knees buckled as the wind began to circle her again, lifting dust, snapping branches. It pulled the door from its hinges and slammed it behind her. The villagers were frozen in place. Children clung to their mothers. Even the birds had gone silent. Then came the final humiliation. From inside her house, old letters and scraps of paper, things she'd hidden, things meant to bury Nia's truth, came spilling out. Notes Nia had written to the king, the ones meant to tell her story, the ones the stepmother had burned. But they weren't ashes. They reappeared now, whole and fluttering through the air like black-winged birds. One by one they landed around the chief's feet. He picked one up and read aloud. It was a letter written in Nia's careful hand. "To my father, the king," he read, voice growing harder. "I am alive, but I am not safe." The crowd gasped. Gasps turned to murmurs. Murmurs turned to shouts. She hid the letters. She knew Nia was royal. She lied to the king. The chief raised his hand and silence fell once more. "You have committed crimes not only against this girl," he said, staring down the trembling stepmother, "but against the kingdom, against truth, against nature itself." The wind, satisfied, began to calm. The air cooled. The earth stilled beneath their feet. But the silence that followed was heavier than any roar. The people had seen. And once the wind had chosen sides, no one could unsee what had been revealed. The chief, a man with silver hair and a heavy staff carved with family symbols, stepped forward slowly. The villagers parted for him, their breaths held tight in their chests. Nia sat up from the bed the wind had made for her, not of wood or straw but of gathered blankets and forest leaves, gently anchored in place by unseen hands. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of everything she had endured. She didn't rise. She didn't need to. The chief came to a stop before her, his sandals brushing the dirt where the wind had swept clean a circle around Nia. For a moment he said nothing. His eyes scanned the rippling air, the low hum in the breeze. It wasn't a normal wind. It had presence, rhythm, something that responded to attention. "Nia," the chief said quietly, lowering his voice as if he, too, didn't want to disturb what hovered in the space between them. "Child, do you know what this is?" The wind moved behind her, brushing her back like a protective hand. Nia tilted her head slightly. "I sleep," she said, "and it stays. I speak, and it listens." Someone from the crowd gasped. Another murmured a prayer. "And when you weep?" the chief asked. Nia blinked. "It brings songs." The chief nodded slowly. He looked to the crowd. "I have heard the rumors. That she commands the wind. That the house shudders when she breathes. That the river refused to freeze when she lay beside it." He looked back to Nia. "But I do not see a curse. I see a child." The stepmother pushed forward then, her voice sharp like a thorn in the calm. "She's bewitched, chief. That thing she calls wind, it's a trick. It shames my house. If It frightens the animals. The blankets lifted from my roof. The spirits you fear are turning against us. The chief raised a hand and the woman fell silent. We will see, he said. He turned back to Nia. Can you tell me, little one, what happened the first night? Nia looked at the ground. Then she raised her eyes again, slow and cautious. It was cold. I thought I would vanish. But then I heard something. Like a voice but not words. It wrapped around me. I wasn't alone. As she spoke, the wind picked up. Not violently, but as if in rhythm with her breath. It lifted a strand of her hair, swept a trail of dust that circled once around the chief's feet, and then moved upward, catching a few dry petals from the nearby bush and holding them in the air like they were listening. And the second night? I was pushed out again. But this time the wind stayed longer. It was angry. It broke things. The chief glanced toward the stepmother. She looked away. And the third. A priest tried to break it. The wind didn't like that. It threw him away. I didn't ask it to. The wind swirled softly now, lifting the ends of the chief's robe, circling his staff, then returning to hover beside Nia like a tame creature awaiting praise. Then the elder woman, the one who had whispered to others that she once saw the ancestors in dreams, stepped forward. I know this wind, she said softly. Not this shape, not this sound. But this feeling. When I was a girl, our grandmother said the wind had memory. That when our land was young, the wind moved for justice. It guarded our babies. It punished liars. The chief nodded, then turned once more to Nia. You have not lied? I have no reason to lie, she said. The breeze gathered near her lips and shimmered as she spoke. I just wanted to sleep. The wind responded. This time everyone saw it. It gathered dust, leaves, and ash, not wildly, but in a soft spiral that danced around Nia's bed. A cloth from a nearby line detached and floated through the air, then folded itself and lay gently beside her. She does not lie, said the elder woman again. The spirits are clear. The chief stepped back. I will not judge what I do not understand. But I will honor what honors us. He turned toward the stepmother. You cast her out. The spirits brought her in. That is the only truth I see. The crowd murmured, this time not with fear but awe. The children who had crept close on earlier nights nodded, wide-eyed, whispering to one another. One small girl stepped forward and placed a fresh flower beside Nia's feet. The stepmother's face crumpled. This is madness. You will let magic rule us. Not magic, said the chief. Kindness. And wind that tells the truth. And as he turned to leave, the wind blew softly past him, lifting his robe not with mischief but like a bow. The sky wore a cloak of indigo, its stars blinking down like a council of watchers. The air was neither cold nor warm, it simply existed, expectant. In the middle of the compound, where the bed had always hung from the thick branch of the old Irako tree, the villagers gathered. But this time it was not to mock, not to pity, not even to whisper. They came with candles, palm fronds, and soft, reverent expressions on their faces. Nia stood at the edge of the gathering, her bare feet touching the ground lightly, like she was half air herself. The villagers had prepared the hanging bed, smoothing the woven mat and tying colorful fabrics around the ropes. No longer a place of exile, it had become a throne in the open sky. The village had spoken, they had seen enough, heard enough, and now they honored her. Her stepmother stood off to the side, trembling. Her lips were tight, her arms folded, but her shoulders drooped like wilted stalks. The chief had not ordered punishment. He had let the wind decide, and the wind had not been gentle with her. The slaps of the gusts the night before still echoed in her ears, and her spirit now sagged with fear and something else, shame. Nia's father was on his knees, head bowed. He hadn't spoken since the chief's visit. When he looked at his daughter now, he saw a force greater than anything he had ever known, something he had once held in his arms as a baby, now grown into a mystery the world itself seemed to protect. Tonight, the chief had said, she sleeps outside not for punishment, but so that the sky may bear witness. So that the wind may finish its story. Nia walked slowly to the bed. The wind stirred around her feet, a low hum rising as she moved. Children held hands. Elders whispered prayers. A drummer near the edge of the crowd tapped a rhythm, slow, reverent, like a heartbeat returned to the land. As Nia climbed into the bed, the wind surged upward, lifting the edges of the mat like eager hands tucking her in. The fabric canopy above her fluttered, not violently, but like a flag raised in honor. A gust circled her body, wrapping her gently. She did not shiver. She did not cry. Her eyes remained open, watching the stars. Then the wind began to sing. It wasn't a melody like before. This one was solemn, grand, like a funeral and coronation mixed together. The villagers heard it, a chorus of sighs, the low thrum of trees bending, the distant hush of river water. Above all, a whispering voice that seemed to echo from the bones of the earth itself. "She belongs to the wind," someone said. "No," said the elder beside him. "The wind belongs to her." Nia's hair lifted off her shoulders as if unseen fingers combed through it. The ropes of the hanging bed creaked gently, not from strain, but as if swaying in approval. The candles the villagers held did not flicker out. Instead, their flames leaned toward Nia as though bowing too. Her stepmother's resolve crumbled. She stepped forward, hands clenched at her sides. The wind did not stop her, but it met her with stinging gusts each time she took a step. Her face twisted, not from the pain but from the weight of her guilt. The woman who had ordered a child into the night again and again now stood before that same child, stripped of power, stripped of pride. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought she was nothing." The wind slapped her cheeks again, sharp and cold. "She is not nothing," a villager said from the crowd. "She is chosen," said another. Then Nia's father rose. His hands trembled as he moved closer to the bed. The wind didn't stop him. Instead, it circled him, prodding him forward. He sank to his knees before her, head bent. "I failed you," he said. "I was weak. I let others hurt what I should have protected." The wind slowed. The leaves above stilled. The sky leaned closer. Nia did not speak, but she reached down and touched her father's head. A soft warmth spread through the air, like jasmine and firelight. The same scent that had once brought her a dream of her mother now blanketed the crowd. Some swore they heard laughter far away. Some saw shapes in the clouds that looked like a woman's arms embracing them. Then for the first time in weeks, Nia smiled. The wind responded with a slow, rising spiral. It lifted the bed, not high but enough for all to see. The crowd gasped. A child clapped. The bed hovered for a moment, then gently lowered again. It was finished. The chief stepped forward. "Let no child be exiled again," he declared. "Let no spirit be mocked. Let no wind be ignored." The people repeated his words like a chant. And then silence fell, deep and calm. The villagers turned and left slowly, the wind nudging their backs like a guide. The stepmother stayed behind, crying silently into her palms. Nia remained in the bed, eyes open to the stars. The wind wrapped her like a royal cloak, tucking around her shoulders, brushing her cheeks with invisible fingers. That night, no door slammed against the breeze. No shutter banged. No blanket was torn away. Only peace. And when morning came, the bed was empty, but the wind was still singing.